So I have a friend named Stuart. Stuart's a competitive long distance runner. I was visiting him in the hospital recently because he developed a stress fracture in his right foot. And he had to have some pins inserted into the foot and was told by the doctors that he would have to keep off his foot for the next 2 months and then would not be able to resume running again for probably 4 to 6 months. And as you can imagine, being a competitive runner, it's just been devastating to Stuart. Well, as I was visiting him in the hospital room, we started talking a little bit about what this time off his feet might mean to him. And he said, I'm one of those guys that never stops running, never stops going. And this injury has forced me just to stop and to stay in one place. And we talked about that a little bit. And I said, it sounds a little bit like Moses. And he looked at me kind of strange. I said, you remember the story of Moses? I said, he had committed murder in Egypt and had run away and was trying to run from his past life. And one day, while he was keeping watch over a flock of sheep of his father-in-law, he walked by this burning bush, and the bush spoke out to him. The voice of God spoke from the bush and said, remove your sandals, for the ground you're standing on is holy. And I equated Stuart's situation to that time in Moses' life where he was just forced to stop, and that time of stopping and silence would maybe give him some time to reflect on his life and his spiritual life in particular. And so we talked a little bit more about that and the subject of feet, obviously. And then our conversation shifted to Christ. And you remember there's a wonderful story of Jesus gathered with the disciples in the upper room, and prior to the meal, they they are instructed by Jesus to take off their sandals, and he kneels and he takes his robe off and he kneels and he washes their feet. And one of the disciples, Peter, says, Lord, you don't need to wash my feet. And Jesus stops him and says, no, I need to wash your feet. If you don't allow me to do this, then you can have nothing to do with me and my ministry. There's something about this act of service, Peter, that you need to understand. And I just found it interesting how just a simple conversation around something as mundane as running could lead into these conversations. And it reminded me about the power of metaphor. And Jesus uses these metaphors so often, but I thought about what would it look like for us to see our feet. We talk about ourselves as being the hands and feet of Christ, but what would it mean to be the feet of Christ and taking the gospel into so many places? And just caused me to reflect upon it and to give God the glory for what he's done.